Laura, my 31-year-old wife, and I, 33 years old, have been together for 8 years and married for 6. First off, thank you for taking the time to read this. Please bear with me. I haven't slept much in the past few days, and my mind has been spinning like a tornado. Laura recently went on a work trip abroad with some of her coworkers. For the first couple of days, they were all staying at a hotel. Even though she had long, hectic days, she made sure to FaceTime me every evening. Everything seemed perfectly normal. Then, on the third day, 2 days ago, they moved to a new location to collaborate on a big project with local colleagues. That day was particularly stressful, so she barely messaged me throughout. At around 11 p.m. their time, she finally wrote, telling me she was going to the sauna with her supposed roommate, Anna. The sauna was located within the compound where they were staying, and apparently, it's a common thing to do in that country. However, given how long their day had been, I thought it was a bit late for such an activity. 2.5 hours later, at 1:30 a.m., Laura texted again, saying, "I'm going to sleep now. Right when you wake up. Love you." But something about it felt off. She didn't mention being tired, skipping our usual call, or even what she'd been doing in those 2.5 hours. I wouldn't call myself controlling, but Laura always kept me in the loop about these things. This message felt unusually distant and cold, entirely out of character for her. That's when I got this horrible gut feeling. And let me tell you, my gut is rarely wrong. It's like an early warning system for disaster. I'd already had a strange vibe about this trip, but up until then, I hadn't found anything concrete. Now, I had to dig deeper. Laura had left her laptop at home, and since it syncs her messages in real time, I could see her conversations as they happened. I noticed she had an ongoing message thread with a coworker, Mark. The last message she'd sent him was a single emoji, a heart with a band-aid. I didn't even know that emoji existed, let alone what it meant. Feeling uneasy, I left her laptop open while I got ready for bed. Suddenly, I saw a new message pop up from Laura to Mark. "Come to room 3. My heart stopped. Panic took over. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Even though I'd had this sinking feeling, I never actually thought Laura would do something like this. She was the one person I believed would never betray me. I've been cheated on in the past, twice, and it taught me to recognize red flags. But Laura had always seemed like the polar opposite of that. Or maybe she was just exceptionally good at hiding it. 1,000 scenarios ran through my mind. What if room 3 was something innocent? Maybe she was calling Mark to discuss work, or because he needed help. But why message only him? Maybe Anna had asked Laura to invite Mark instead. But if that were true, why didn't Anna just message Mark herself? And what possible reason could Mark and Laura have to meet privately in her room at that hour? As my thoughts spiraled, I noticed that Mark's message hadn't been delivered yet. Maybe his phone was dead. About an hour later, I saw his reply, "Going there." Now, my heart was racing so fast it felt like it might burst. Laura didn't reply to Mark, and his message stayed on read. I thought, maybe she's fallen asleep, and Mark will knock, realize she's not answering, and leave. But the message stayed on read for the next 7 hours. I forced myself to stay awake the entire night, hoping for some clue to make sense of all this. Then, in real time, I saw Laura's entire thread with Mark get deleted. That's when my last shred of hope disappeared. An hour later, Laura messaged another coworker, asking them to tell Mark she had his phone. Laura and Mark didn't exchange a single message for the rest of the day. Now, about that gut feeling I mentioned earlier, it wasn't entirely baseless. A couple of weeks before this trip, Laura, a friend, and I went out for drinks. That night, I met some of her coworkers, including Mark. I'd heard of him before, but this was my first time actually seeing him in person. I also learned something during that bar outing that set off alarm bells. Laura doesn't work closely with Mark, which made it odd that I'd hear so little about him compared to her other coworkers. It all made sense the moment we arrived at the bar. We were dancing, and Mark was holding something in his hand. Laura suddenly took it from him, slipped it into her pocket, and teased him playfully. That moment, my gut tightened. It was my first inkling that she was behaving differently around him than anyone else. Later, we moved outside. While I was talking to someone, Laura stayed close to Mark. She placed her hand on his arm, and it lingered just a moment too long. A few minutes later, they hugged. At this point, I was fuming. All week long, Laura had been overworked, distant, and dismissive with me, barely showing me any affection. Yet here she was, acting affectionate and relaxed with this guy. When we got home, I confronted her about it. I told her it hurt to see her be so engaged with someone else when I'd felt ignored all week. Instead of listening, she blew up. She overreacted, saying things like, "How dare you accuse me?" and started packing a backpack, declaring she was going to stay at a hotel. It was late, far too late for any hotel to check her in, but I told her, "Go ahead." She stormed out. But as I listened, I didn't hear the sound of the front door downstairs closing. She didn't leave the building. She also left her iPad at home, which was still logged into Instagram. Not proud of this, but I felt compelled to see what was going on. I noticed a conversation she'd had with another guy she hadn't seen in years, arranging to meet for drinks. At first glance, it seemed innocent. They'd always been friends as far as I knew. But as I watched, that entire thread got deleted in real time. I was so fixated on that one conversation disappearing, I missed other threads being deleted as well. I was drunk and couldn't keep up. I texted her about the plans I'd seen. At first, she claimed she just wanted to catch up with an old friend. I called her out, saying that wasn't true. Then she backpedaled, saying no concrete plans had been made. When I told her I'd seen the messages, she kept denying everything, never once explaining it was purely friendly or innocent. Instead, she pivoted, saying, "How can you keep doubting me? I'm under so much pressure at work. I'm sorry I'm not enough. I can't be everything to everyone." I told her if there'd been a misunderstanding, she could come upstairs and we'd talk it out. She came up, but instead of clarifying anything, she cried uncontrollably and turned the conversation into a guilt trip about how she wasn't good enough. I felt terrible and let it go for the moment. I went to sleep beside her, thinking we both needed rest. We didn't bring it up again, but we agreed to revisit the issue after she returned from her trip. Over the next few days, we went on dates and had amazing intimacy. Yet despite the good times, I couldn't shake my doubts. Before she left, I had access to her message thread with Mark. I noticed some subtle flirting from both sides, like her joking about falling asleep on his shoulder during their flight. That's impossible given the airline's check-in system. They must have deliberately switched seats to sit next to each other. Still, since all the coworkers were spending so much time together in person, the message thread itself wasn't overwhelmingly incriminating. Yesterday, when Laura got to her hotel, I knew because I'd checked Find My iPhone. I waited for her to text or call me, but when half an hour passed, I reached out, asking if she was still out. She called me shortly after, saying she'd just gotten to her room. Her appearance struck me immediately. Her neck and chest, all the way down to the area between her breasts, were red, like the marks I leave on her when my beard grazes her skin during intimate moments. When I asked about it, she acted completely surprised and claimed it was probably her scarf. But the redness was only on one side and extended much farther down than any scarf would reach. I didn't push her too hard, though. I didn't want her to suspect I was onto her. I needed concrete evidence. We talked for an hour, but her behavior seemed unusual. Normally, as soon as she gets to her room, she starts her bedtime routine. That night, it felt like she was stalling, delaying getting ready for bed, except for putting on her pajamas. I tried to keep her talking, hoping I'd catch something, maybe Mark messaging her, or vice versa. I casually asked about the sauna she claimed to visit. She said it was packed, so she barely stayed. But when I pressed for details, her story didn't quite add up. At this point, I'd been awake for over 36 hours, so I recorded our conversation to make sense of it later. We eventually ended the call, and I finally went to sleep. When I woke up, I checked her messages. No activity between her and Mark. A few hours later, she FaceTimed me for a quick check-in, and then Laura told me she'd try to write whenever she could, but if she didn't, it was because she was overwhelmed. She explained it was hard to balance everything and assured me it wasn't because she was doing anything questionable. Still, my doubts lingered. If you've made it this far, thank you, truly. My head has been spinning for days, and there's so much uncertainty weighing on me. Divorce has been on my mind constantly, even though it tears me apart to think about it. We have plans to buy a house and start a family next year. But even if nothing physical happened between Laura and Mark, she's already betrayed my trust. She told me she was going to sleep, only to invite him to her room. That alone shattered something fundamental between us. Even before that, she disregarded my feelings when I told her I was uncomfortable with how close she'd become to Mark. Despite my concerns, she continued fostering a deeper connection with him. On top of that, her actions are reckless. I'm certain her coworkers have started noticing something, and she's risking both her career and our relationship. I can't live the rest of my life scrutinizing every little thing, looking for signs of infidelity. For example, a few days ago, I noticed 2 symmetrical bruises on her thighs, something she couldn't explain. I know for a fact I didn't cause them. I hate feeling forced to snoop, but at the same time, I feel like the evidence I've gathered isn't strong enough to justify divorce. Our finances are separate, which complicates things for reasons too long to explain. The car is in her name, and I can't just threaten divorce or even discuss it openly because I'm afraid she might move money around, leaving me to start from scratch. Most of all, I'm heartbroken. I love Laura deeply. She's been my soulmate, the love of my life. But now, it feels like the person I fell in love with is gone, replaced by someone I don't recognize. How could everything fall apart in just a few days? What if I'm wrong about all of this? Edit. Laura's been unusually flirtatious with me over text today. She hasn't acted this way in weeks. Edit 2. I forgot to mention, Laura has been working from home since joining the company in January. She's only met her coworkers in person about a dozen times. Edit 3. I haven't seen any new apps downloaded on her devices, but I realized that she and Mark both use Slack for work. It's far easier to hide conversations there than by downloading a new app. Edit 4. Laura called me again. She's back at the original hotel now after working all day at the office. One of the first things she told me was that her arm was bruised, possibly from the other location, though she wasn't sure how it happened. She also said, "I'm all bruised up. Well, not all bruised up, just this one bruise." It was too dark to see it clearly on the call. Then, I found the smoking gun. While wrapping up some work on her laptop, I saw a new message thread between Laura and Mark. At first, it looked like typical work-related conversation, but the tone felt subtly flirty, like something designed to be deniable. I waited, certain the discussion wouldn't remain purely professional. Sure enough, Laura initiated something more personal. She asked, "Where's your book? Is it there? Maybe you can deliver it to my room." Mark replied, "Bad idea." Laura said, "You can if you want to." Mark hesitated. I didn't know how good the idea was. "The book's here already." Laura teased, "Glad you've got it already, unless you want to give it another look. Although, I think your gum is here still. I only have mine, and I need to read it first." Mark responded, "Yeah, it is. Maybe I need some gum now." Laura replied, "Only if you're going to sleep and not cause any trouble." Mark closed with, "I'm going to sleep for sure. Go get your gum. Open the door." I was absolutely devastated. Reading those words crushed whatever hope I had left. I know some of you warned me, but experiencing this in real time was unbearable. I've contacted a lawyer. They instructed me on how to proceed. This morning, Laura messaged me, but I delayed my replies while I prepared my next move. I think she sensed something was off because I wasn't responding like usual. A short while later, I noticed she had changed her Instagram password and removed the WhatsApp link from her profile. I sent her a message and an email stating that all further communication should go through my lawyer. I got no contact. Mark tried to call me, but I blocked him. Laura is now reaching out to my friends, claiming she has no idea what prompted my actions. A couple of her friends have also asked me for more information. Per my lawyer's advice, I'm keeping the details to myself for now. Laura seems to be seeking sympathy from everyone, painting herself as a victim. Laura's emails continued, each one laced with a mix of desperation and guilt. She claimed to be clueless about why I was acting this way. Edit 6. In every email, she repeatedly mentioned that she wouldn't be around tomorrow and that this situation would kill her. She wrote things like, "I'll die if you don't let me in tonight." While I had no intention of letting her back in, I started to feel concerned about her mental state. Edit 7. In another email, she finally acknowledged, I haven't betrayed you, but I've been unfair and dishonest. This trickle truth approach made it clear she might think I only knew about Mark entering her room. She seemed to be controlling the narrative, sharing just enough to sound remorseful, but withholding the full truth. Edit 8. Then came one of the hardest hours of my life. She claimed her phone had no battery, but continued emailing me updates about her battery percentage. Each email more desperate than the last, with subtle references to suicidal thoughts. I had to call the cops to perform a welfare check. I also got in touch with one of her friends, who arranged for Laura to get a hotel and an Uber. Throughout all of this, Laura insisted that she would only talk face-to-face. The last thing she said was that she'd confess everything to her family, so I wouldn't have to. Yet, even then, I still didn't know what the full truth was. Edit 9. Laura made it to the hotel safely. She emailed again, saying that everything I needed to know was written in the Notes app on her computer. I started wondering if this was just another manipulation tactic, part of some larger game she was playing. What the actual hell was going on? October 30, first update. Laura finally sent me an email outlining her version of the facts. Let me preface this by saying her friend had called her earlier, asking directly if there were any messages between her and Mark. Laura lied and told her friend there weren't. Now here are the key points she admitted to. Another guy on Friday night. She confessed to dancing, hugging, and getting physically close to another guy during a work outing. He tried to kiss her, but she claimed she stopped him, saying she couldn't because she was married. About Mark. She claimed that she never looked at Mark in that way before, even during the night we all went out together. However, she admitted to falling asleep on his shoulder, not just on the plane but also on the bus. She justified it by saying they chose to sit next to each other on the bus, subtly shifting blame to make it seem like it was mutual. But I know she sought him out. She didn't initially sit with him. Room 3 incident. She said she didn't hear Mark knock, and her roommate, Anna, let him in. She claimed she woke up to find him hugging her. She told him to stop, and Anna turned on the lights and asked him to leave. Her story was inconsistent with what I already knew. She's clearly lying about the sequence of events and who initiated the contact. The book and gum incident. Laura admitted to messaging Mark about the book, saying it was in her room and inviting him to retrieve it. She claimed Mark had asked colleagues earlier in the day if anyone could hold his book, and she volunteered. However, this contradicts the timeline. The book was with Mark, and her message was a fabricated excuse to get into her room. That night, she said he lingered at the door. They hugged for an uncomfortably long time, with her pulling away and him pulling her back in. She admitted she gave in to the hug, but insisted nothing else happened. Another visit. On a different night, likely the one involving the book and gum, Mark came to her room again. This time, he sat on her bed. They talked, hugged, and she admitted they both knew he wanted something to happen. She claimed she resisted, and eventually, he left after about 30 minutes. The neck kiss. Laura admitted that Mark kissed her neck during one of their hugs, but insisted it wasn't the cause of the red mark I noticed. According to her, the mark was from her scarf. Using his phone. She acknowledged using Mark's phone to call me, meaning he was fully aware of the situation and the tension between us. Deleted messages. Laura confessed to deleting messages she'd sent to Mark, claiming it was to avoid raising suspicions. She maintained that the only inappropriate message was the one where she asked where his book was, implying she wanted him to come over. Instagram password change. She said she changed her Instagram password because she was afraid the guy from Friday night might message her something she couldn't explain. No physical affairs. Laura insisted she never kissed, slept with, or had sex with anyone. However, she admitted she crossed boundaries by engaging in emotionally and physically inappropriate behavior. She framed all of this as the result of stress. According to her, she has a pattern of reacting poorly to stress and needs help to manage it. She claims she hurt herself emotionally to cope and promised to seek therapy. Laura kept pleading for understanding, saying the flirting went too far, but that nothing physical happened. She emphasized that she needs help and compassion, claiming she couldn't afford to stay in a hotel for a week, something I knew was a blatant lie. She can easily afford a hotel for months if she wanted to. She tried to tug at my emotions, saying, "You might not believe I deserve it, but I need it right now." I genuinely didn't know how to respond to her anymore. Edit 10. Last night wasn't the hardest. Apparently, things could get even worse. Laura sent me a screenshot of a conversation she had with Mark. Mark wrote something cryptic, claiming he had proof that they had slept together. Laura responded in panic, denying everything. That proof doesn't exist because we didn't sleep together, so I genuinely don't understand what he's referring to. She then speculated. Whatever proof he might have, it's not the truth. I don't know how he would have gotten it. But as we know, that never happened. Her denial seemed rehearsed, and she sounded more focused on avoiding blame than on accountability. She continued, I told him everything that did happen, but he doesn't believe me. I'm sorry you're involved in this. Just wanted to give you a heads up in case it comes your way. I couldn't help but be baffled by the mental gymnastics. She talked about how nothing happened, as if that somehow justified the lies and dishonesty. Meanwhile, she drew arbitrary moral lines, implying that kissing, lying, and emotional betrayal weren't as serious as physical infidelity. Then she sent me a video. In it, she said her name and showed her ID, announcing that she was transferring ownership of the car to me. The background in the video didn't reveal her location, but it alarmed me. I've seen enough TV to know that people often do this when contemplating suicide. Panicked, I called her. We talked for an hour, a conversation I recorded so I could process it later. My primary goal was to keep her on the line as long as possible, assess her mental state, and find out where she was. Throughout the call, she repeatedly insisted. I didn't sleep with him. I haven't slept with anyone. I haven't kissed anyone since we've been together. But her tone was frantic, and nothing about the conversation eased my concerns. She hung up multiple times, saying dramatic goodbyes. Her mental state seemed to deteriorate, and I knew I needed to de-escalate the situation quickly. I suggested we both take a week to calm down before talking face-to-face. She protested, saying her heart couldn't take it and she couldn't handle the waiting. Her tone eventually shifted to anger. Why do you need a week when I've already told you everything in the email? We went in circles, but by the end of the call, I managed to calm her down slightly. Now I'm left wondering what will happen when we finally meet in person. I know I don't want to reconcile. Laura has shown so little regard for me throughout this ordeal, continually blaming her actions on stress and deflecting responsibility. Meeting her face-to-face seems unlikely to change anything, but I'm considering arranging a mediated meeting. Not with my lawyer. He's made it clear that's not his role, but perhaps with a therapist or neutral third party. I'd like someone there to keep the discussion civil and constructive. A therapist might not be ideal since their role is more about healing, but maybe one of her friends could attend to make her feel more secure. Whatever happens, I'll record the session. I need something more reliable than my phone for this. Letting another week pass, and then reiterating that we won't meet face-to-face could set her off again. I'm hoping this time apart will give her a chance to gather her thoughts and finally come clean. However, I doubt she'll admit to anything unless there's irrefutable evidence. I'm even considering asking her to take a polygraph if it comes to that. Edit 11. A friend of mine shared something about their recent interaction that makes everything even murkier. The phrase Laura used, if you're going to sleep and not cause any trouble, heavily implied that Mark had caused trouble before. However, according to her account of the previous night, Mark stayed for only 5 minutes when he came to pick up the book, and they just hugged. But on the night she sent that message, she said he came in, sat on the bed, talked with her for 30 minutes, and then left. These two accounts can't both be true. It's completely contradictory. I know at this point it's not just about getting the full truth for my sake. It's about her realizing how deeply she's crossed the line. I fear she's clinging to the illusion that what she did wasn't that bad, and that it's forgivable simply because I'm her whole life. Edit 12. I called Anna to get some clarity. I asked why she let Mark into the room that night. At first, she denied letting anyone in. When I pressed further, she admitted someone had knocked at the door and eventually entered but insisted she didn't let them in. When I asked how long they stayed, Anna became defensive, accusing me of disturbing her during her vacation. Her tone made it clear she was covering for Laura. At one point, she even said, "I'm not responsible for what they did in the room," followed quickly by, "but nothing happened." Later, she tried to excuse herself by claiming she misunderstood my English and thought I was asking about a room break-in. Edit 13. I asked Laura to provide a detailed recount of the events if she cared about rebuilding trust. What she sent me was even more vague than her initial email, just the same broad strokes about 5 minutes, 30 minutes, and the book. Eventually, she called me. During that conversation, she admitted to flirting with Mark at one of her first work events about a month ago. She also confessed to flirting with him the night we all went out together, something she had previously denied. This came only after I confronted her with all the evidence I had. I told her there's no way she would have invited Mark to her room without prior intentions or a history of inappropriate behavior. She continued insisting her version of events about room 3, but couldn't explain why Anna let Mark in. Then she finally admitted to spending time with him during the sauna visit, a detail she had lied about earlier. At this point, I began to think I might be dealing with something pathological. Her inability to acknowledge the gravity of her lies, her lack of remorse, and her straight-faced recounting of events all felt deeply abnormal. I can't be someone else's psychologist, but if Laura has some sort of disorder that triggered this, she needs professional help. Her support network is already small, and this situation has likely damaged it even further. I'm considering moving out temporarily and letting her stay in the apartment while she seeks therapy. I genuinely don't think she'll survive mentally or emotionally otherwise. Laura agreed to take a polygraph test, though I've read that these aren't reliable if someone has a psychological disorder. She even suggested going to the hospital to get a test to confirm whether she'd had intercourse. She phrased it oddly, saying, "Have them check if there's any semen in my underwear," which struck me as bizarre. I feel like my only remaining option to get the full truth and make her confront the reality of her actions is to meet her face-to-face. I would bring her friend along as a neutral party and ask to see her phone. If she genuinely wants to rebuild trust, she'd have nothing to hide. I also considered sending a text to Mark pretending to be Laura and saying, "I'm with my husband. He's planning to report you to the company for sexual assault over the first night." I don't know what to do. My hope would be to gauge his reaction, but this feels deeply out of character for me. It doesn't sit right. I'm truly convinced that I can't continue this relationship. Laura has repeatedly lied, shown no remorse, and continuously deflected blame onto external factors like stress. But at the same time, she's a human being I've cared deeply for, and I can't ignore that. She doesn't have anyone else here to support her. If we part ways, the only viable option for her might be returning home to her family. Hey everyone, I know it's been a while since my last update. I've been radio silent because things have been chaotic. Since my last post, Laura and I have been going back and forth. I kept pressing Laura for more details, but she stuck to vague denials, crying as she admitted, "I cheated. I lied. I'm a piece of crap. I'll do anything to fix this. I'll beg if I have to." This past week, I've been so stressed that I've lost 2 notches on my belt. If nothing else, I guess I'll end up with a 6-pack out of this mess. On Monday, I decided it was time for a self-care day. I had lunch in a quaint village near where I was staying. I didn't have any plans, but was drawn by the smell of freshly baked bread and wood-fired food. The restaurant was cozy, with only 2 tables occupied, mine and one with 3 elderly women chatting and savoring their meal. A neighbor stopped by, and they all struck up a friendly conversation. For the first time in a long while, I smiled. It reminded me how beautifully simple life can be. Afterward, I went for a massage. It turned out to be the most transformative one I've ever had. The knot in my stomach, the one that had been there since all this began, finally eased. My thoughts were a bit clearer. That evening, I returned to my hotel to read an email Laura had sent earlier. She'd promised a detailed timeline of her day. I sat at the bar with a virgin piña colada. No alcohol for me since this nightmare started. I need a clear mind. The email was meticulous, describing every mundane detail. Who she took an Uber with when she went to the bathroom, and so on. But when it came to the important parts, like the time she called me or when she told me she was going to sleep, her memory was conveniently fuzzy. These things are easily verifiable, yet she chose to omit them. It hit me with brutal clarity. There's no way back from this. Still, I tried. I sent her an email outlining 3 versions of events, each progressively admitting more responsibility and truth. She brushed it off, saying, "These are the things I remember. I just don't remember other details." I asked to meet her in person the next day, Tuesday, with her best friend present as both support and a witness. No contact had been hard, but we kept talking. I kept asking why Anna would open the door for someone if there had been no prior conversation or signals. Laura's story shifted again. She claimed Anna thought the visit was for her because Mark had been flirting with Anna, sitting on her lap in the sauna, and so on. During this exchange, I crossed a line. While at work, I was in the middle of an anti-harassment training session. It felt like the universe was mocking me. I told Laura that if Mark had entered her bed uninvited and Anna opened the door for him, this could be considered a case of sexual harassment or even assault. Laura backed off from her begging and apologies after that. Later, she sent me a screenshot of a message she'd sent Anna, asking for clarification. "I'm sorry to do this, but I need your answer about something." Anna responded curtly. "I was shocked by your husband's call, and you involving me in something I have no relation to at all. Please stop it." When Laura forwarded that exchange to me, I genuinely broke down. I think she sent it as a prelude to a "how dare you involve her" argument. I replied, telling her yes, I had spoken to Anna, and that's why I had asked Laura to leave her out of this. Laura agreed not to involve Anna further. I knew meeting Laura in person would be painful, but I had to do it. I needed her to hear from me directly how deeply she had hurt me. I also wanted to give her one last chance to say something honest, anything at all. I prepared a written statement, knowing I couldn't rely on my memory or emotions in the moment. I zoomed out, describing what I'd been through, the damage this caused, the pain that lingers, and the scars it will leave behind. Laura listened, but left shortly after. Her friend stayed behind. At first, I thought her friend might take the "this is out of character" angle, but instead, she said, "I know how good of a liar she is." Her friend gave me insight into Laura's possible motivations, suggesting it might stem from issues in her past. She also told me that Laura had lied to her too, offering two completely different versions of what had happened. That revelation broke me. I'm grateful her friend is there for her, but it's clear even those closest to Laura can't trust her. Laura sent me yet another message. Another series of texts arrived from Laura, laden with implications of her spiraling mental state. She asked me to send certain belongings to her parents and requested my bank account information so she could transfer everything. Later, she told me she'd speak with my lawyers today. I responded that I couldn't process everything she was writing at the moment and would read it later. Today, she replied that it was okay and encouraged me to focus on work, even asking how it was going and offering to listen if I wanted to share. She sent me an email recounting our entire relationship history, painstakingly listing every way she believed she had failed me. She wrote about the times she didn't see me clearly enough or love me fully, and I had to fight back tears as I read it at a coffee shop. She also invited me to a shared iCloud album titled Love. I haven't accepted the invitation. I now understand why no contact is critical. I have to endure this. I can't let myself be swayed. I often find myself rereading the messages between Laura and Mark. I know many will say it's unhealthy, but I need to remind myself of what happened, of what was real. I have a tendency to forget, to let things go, and I can't afford to let myself minimize this betrayal. What Laura is going through now may be real, but so is what I went through and am still experiencing. Thank you to everyone who has stayed with me through this. I couldn't have managed without the support, advice, and encouragement I've received here. There will be days when I doubt my decision to end things, and I'll come back to these posts, to this crazy soap opera for clarity. This post may be longer than it should be, but I needed to air it out. I've exhausted my best friend with this saga. Even though he's been kind, I can't burden him with the full details anymore. To all of you who have been part of this journey, thank you. I'm sorry if I've missed anyone, but your words have been invaluable. I'll update again when the papers are finally signed. I know I've said I didn't care about uncovering every last detail of the truth, but the reality is these thoughts pop into my head at random times, pulling me down the rabbit hole again. I need these reminders to ground myself in the reality of what happened. They help me resist Laura's attempts to rewrite the narrative as something born out of work stress or spontaneous bad decisions. This time, the rabbit hole might have been my most productive yet. Some of you might recall the conversation from my original post between Laura and Mark The one about the book and the gum. Two specific sentences from that exchange have haunted me because they don't make grammatical sense in context. One Reddit user's comment helped me see things differently. They suggested that in coded conversations like these, phrases might not make sense on the surface because they carry hidden meanings. Their breakdown of the conversation was eye-opening. Where's your book? Equals you should come to my room. You can deliver it in my room. Equals you can come to my room tonight. Bad idea. Equals someone might see me. Although I think your gum is here still. Equals maybe you should come to my room. Maybe I need some gum now. Equals maybe I should come to your room. Only if you're going to sleep and not cause any trouble. Equals we'll have sex again. I'm going to sleep for sure. Equals I'll be tired after that. Go get your gum. Equals you should definitely come over. Open the door. Equals unlock the door so I can come straight in. This interpretation changed everything for me. Laura claimed Mark had gone to her room the night before this conversation to retrieve a book that didn't fit in his bag. According to her, he only stayed for 5 minutes and nothing else happened. However, the conversation contradicts this. In the book and gum exchange, Laura and Mark said things like, "The book is here already, and glad you've got it already." These statements make no sense if Mark had indeed collected the book the night before. Here's what I'm now convinced happened. There was no book. The book was a pretext Mark used the previous night to visit Laura's room. This entire setup was about creating excuses to interact in private, and Laura played along. She told me she didn't remember when she called to say she was going to sleep, but in another conversation, she admitted she told me she'd arrived at the hotel 15 minutes after she actually had. I now know I texted her 15 minutes after her arrival, asking if she was still out. She called me 5 minutes later. The timeline doesn't add up, and the details about the book reveal yet another layer of deception. The coded exchange between Laura and Mark became even clearer with time. On the night, she sent, "Where's your book? Is it there?" and followed it up with teasing remarks. The subtext is obvious. It aligns with Mark sneaking out of her room the previous night. The excuse about looking for a book was meant to cover up why he was leaving empty-handed. The following day, when Mark said, "The book is here already," it was another layer of the excuse, implying he had already found the book. Laura's reply, "Glad you've got it already," was literal and fit perfectly into their fabricated story. This new lens made it clear the book wasn't real. It was an excuse used to cover up Mark's presence in her room. The gum reference wasn't a euphemism, but something Mark genuinely left there, reinforcing their casual, repeated proximity. These details also explain the red marks I saw on Laura's neck and chest. They weren't from her scarf, as she claimed, but rather evidence of what happened in her room that night. Laura began using my language to shape her admissions: betrayal, gaslighting, manipulating, trickle truth, and eventually cheating. But these weren't terms she came to on her own. They were echoes of the words I introduced during our conversations. Even as she parroted them, I don't think she fully accepted the gravity of her actions. For her, saying the words seemed more about appearing remorseful than truly acknowledging the pain she caused. It was part of her mental gymnastics, a way to maintain some semblance of being the good person while deflecting the deeper truth. She claimed there was no sex or kissing, and she stuck to that denial. However, her admissions grew over time. She eventually confessed that on the third night, Mark stayed in her room longer than 30 minutes. They both fell asleep at one point, and she had to wake him up and ask him to leave. She hadn't mentioned this before. When I confronted her about the gaps and contradictions, she insisted she had told me everything. Yet every revelation came incrementally, always framed as the final piece of the puzzle. Laura's emails became shorter and less elaborate over time, though she continued retelling nostalgic moments from our relationship, slipping in inside jokes, and asking about my day. I stopped replying, except to state that if she ever wanted to share the full truth, my inbox would remain open, for logistical matters only. One day, in a moment of pure frustration, I caved. I sent her a one-liner. "I'm deeply disappointed in you. I'm not sure if I regret it. The weight of all this has been immense." I pieced together the events of that second night from Laura's admissions, the gaps I've filled in, and my own observations. The facts are overwhelming, but so is the emotional toll. Laura's behavior, Her deleting texts, maintaining secrecy, and forging a deeper connection with Mark even after I made my discomfort clear, was enough to shatter my trust entirely. The advice I've received has been invaluable. Many of you, like Tertiary78, have pointed out that this is no way to live. Tracking her messages, second-guessing every interaction, and constantly trying to uncover the truth is exhausting and unsustainable. Newell shared an important perspective that resonates deeply. Always trust your gut. Don't make rash decisions, but prepare yourself, financially, legally, and emotionally. At this point, I know there's no salvaging this marriage. The trust is broken, and the relationship has been irreparably damaged. Laura's explosive reaction and desperate attempts to rewrite the narrative only further confirm that much of her guilt stems from being caught, not from genuine remorse. I've started taking the necessary steps. Legal preparation. I've contacted a lawyer and am getting my finances in order. Emotional support. I'm focusing on self-care like the massage and solo lunches and leaning on my close friends. Perspective. I'm working to accept that no matter how much I loved Laura, this version of her isn't someone I can trust or build a future with. To anyone going through something similar, trust yourself. Don't let lies and manipulation erode your sense of reality. You deserve honesty, respect, and someone who values you enough to prioritize your relationship over fleeting desires.